Now let's have someone weigh in on these recent developments, and top of mind, as always, is our resident geopolitical analyst, Richard Heydarian. Great to see you again, Richard.
Salamat, good to see you. Just to be clear, I think it was on my podcast that Justice Carpio said he's willing to take up the first time the debate with Senator Marcoleta. I saw your interview with him, very interesting.
Well, let's leave that debate for to discuss later on in the show. But what's your assessment of the tensions now, the harsh words being exchanged by the senators and Chinese embassy officials? Is it time for the ambassador to go?
To be honest, medyo surprised ako dito with the turn of events. For the sake of transparency, actually, I had the opportunity to have a meeting with the new Chinese ambassador just the other month before I headed back here to Oxford. And the sense I got from that meeting, it was a very comprehensive 1 to 2 hour conversation. It was very constructive. It was very, I would say, I was very honest and very clear about where the Philippines stands and what to expect and what not to expect. To be fair to the new Chinese ambassador, he has a background in Washington, D.C., so he understands how democracies like ours operate. He understands their checks and balances, their separation of powers. He understands the complexity of communication and sensitivity of communication. And he's someone who has made it very clear that stabilization, not a golden age of bilateral relationship, but a stabilization of relationship is something important for him. At the same time, of course, as you can see with Secretary Lazaro of Department of Foreign Affairs, you can see with President Marcos, also, they are committed to stabilization of bilateral relationship against the backdrop of a lot of uncertainty in the global geopolitical landscape, with Trump potentially engaging in yet another military activity, the rules-based order under pressure. But here we are. We have this world war, and I wonder if this is the advent of hindi na wolf warrior, parang dragon warrior. I didn't have a chance to see the spokesman of the Chinese embassy, but it looks like the spokesman is the new dragon warrior and is really taking up on multiple figures, and probably didn't help that Ronald Llamas and some of our colleagues also joined the fray. But to be honest, because we're the ASEAN chair this year, I hope our senators and everyone keep in mind that we have to look all good also to the rest of ASEAN, meaning, yes, we have to stand by our rights. Yes, we have to push back against any kind of bullying. Yes, no one has a right to tell us what to say and what not to say, especially in our own country. But having said that, this is the year that we want all the major leaders to come to Manila. We want to have some movement on the code of conduct negotiations. We want to get ASEAN on our side. And to be honest, from outside the Philippines, some ASEAN countries are looking at it and saying, here go again the Filipinos and everyone trying to score political points by making the Chinese a punching bag. Of course, I don't agree with that characterization, but we have to be sensitive also how the rest of ASEAN will perceive the situation.
Okay, so how can cooler heads intervene? How can we dial down the exchange?
Well, it takes two, or in this case, maybe three to tango. At least on the part of the Malacanang, they made it clear they don't want to be part of any world war. And I think it's quite important. You had the First Lady, Liza Araneta, being with the ambassador the other week, signaling that the first family, the administration is committed to stabilization, not a golden era, a stabilization of bilateral relationships just to make sure things don't get out of control. But I think both the spokesman of the Chinese embassy has to roll back this whole dragon warrior. I don't know if someone is trying to establish their street credentials now. They have to draw that back. And also for the senators and our good friends who have clearly, there's a principle behind what they're saying. They're right. I agree with what they're saying. But they have to take into consideration we're ASEAN chair this year. And the priority for our president is to make sure all world leaders will come, including President Xi Jinping, so that we can have some substantive discussion and move the conversation forward in the coming months as we host.
Richard, was your reading of the Chinese ambassador wrong? You said he was, more sober, but it doesn't seem that way based on what's going on.
I don't know how internally things operate. He's new, right? So I don't know if the spokesman is directly getting the talking points from the ambassador. I'm also not sure if this is like testing the waters, like how far can we go with this? And I won't be also surprised. We have a situation whereby The head of state of Venezuela was just abducted the other month. The president of the United States is threatening Greenland and potentially threatening another military operation against another country in the Middle East. Probably there's some entrepreneurial diplomats out there, not necessarily ambassador, who feel that this is a time for China also to speak out and speak loudly. It's quite interesting that in neighboring Taiwan, we're also seeing a similar phenomenon, but in a sense that we didn't talk about the other side of the equation, the elements in the Philippines who are actually friendly to China. So one thing that I believe made this situation very revealing and very contentious is that you had a lot of senators who are known to be close to President Duterte and who are known to have very China-friendly point of view, to be honest. And I think that made the situation much more complicated. So maybe someone, maybe in China, thought, let's roll the dice and see who is going to be arguing in our behalf or who's going to be much more sympathetic to our position. Maybe someone wanted to muddy the water. So I think it's important for responsible senators and statesmen to make sure, not forget that we're ASEAN chair this year, and also not give a platform to certain points of view that may make China feel that, oh, we have allies anyways in the Philippine Senate, and probably we can push our narrative. So I think that's why we have to be aware of the bigger picture here, because it's sad to see that some of our senators seem to be more interested in arguing against our case rather than also questioning the loopholes in China's claims. Like, okay, we can debate about whether West Philippines is in Google Maps or not, but is the 9-dash line of China in the Google Maps? Or we can talk about our exclusive economic zone, but what have these senators said about what's happening in Scarborough Shoal? So I think it's actually quite worrying for me to see some of the senators coming out and more concerned about what we say against China than about what China is doing against us in the West Philippine Sea. And that also exposes fault lines and weaknesses within our system.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to ask you. I mean, a lot of the tit for tat with the Chinese embassy in Manila Facebook page and is happening with our senators. They are outside the diplomatic space. We saw what happened. Amy Marcos, who is seen largely as friendlier to China, has lost her position also as chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate. But we also heard like some senators actually cursing. Do you think this is a good cop, bad cop situation? Or do you think we're actually losing some sort of pride here because we're, long story short, pumapatol tayo. Diba? Sa mga
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
provocations.
you know it. Pumapatol naman ako when the time is right, right? But I think this is not the right time. I think this time we have to have cooler heads. We have to bring this down because nagiging Zarzuela ito. Remember, I always said that was my concern with the corruption scandal investigation. Gagawin Zarzuela yan, ipopoliticize yan, magiging partisan yan, papogi points yung iba dyan. And unfortunately, we're seeing and yet another very important issue like the West Philippine Sea issue, a very sensitive issue that we already settled in terms of national debate. 90% of Filipinos know what's our claims there. International law is very clear about our claims there. For me, medyo Pandora's box yan eh. Baka babalikan na. Like, I'm very worried. Like, are we really gonna have a debate about, oh, why are we standing up for West? Like, that's not a debate. It's a rabbit hole. To be honest, it's a rabbit hole. We don't look good. We look like we're bullying the new Chinese ambassador to some of the ASEAN countries. Of course, we're not doing that, but that could be misinterpreted that way. But we also look like a very divided country when some senators are more interested in debating the talking points of China or seemingly debating
I
the talking
agree.
points and standing by us. I would be happy if in China they'll have a similar debate. Why not have a version of, I don't know, Marcoleta and Carpio have this debate in the National People's Congress in China? Guess what? They don't have that. So it's weird and it doesn't look good for us. Forget about looking good for some of the senators out there.
What do you think about what precipitated this was, of course, the cartoon images of Chinese President Xi Jinping that was used in a lecture in a college by a Coast Guard West Philippine Sea spokesperson, Jay Tariela. Do you think he should apologize? Or because he's standing firm that I don't need to say sorry for this?
Oh, absolutely. This is our country. You are a guest in our country. You respect our freedom of expression. You can criticize it. You're free also to criticize it, but not to demand us to apologize for it. Oh, let's just be clear with Commodore Tariela. He's obviously nasa blacklist yan ng China because he has been at the forefront of the public diplomacy transparency initiative against China. So I think a lot of people in China are very angry with him. A lot of people who are sympathetic to China are not very happy with Commodore Tariela. And Commodore Tariela, of course, is a phenomenon. I mean, how many times you had a Philippine government official so active and so effective in terms of public diplomacy and social media? So unfortunately, it comes with the territory that when you have that kind of visibility and vocalness, you're going to be under the laser focused eyes of the other side of the equation. But absolutely, he has no reason to apologize for anything. But having said that, as I said, we have to take the moral high ground here. And by taking up the moral high ground means we have to not forget that we have to win the rest of ASEAN to our side. We have to look like the responsible country, and we have to look like a serious, self-respecting democracy. And unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing Zarzuela, we're seeing Pogi points and people trying to suddenly be patriotic, or people trying to actually. I mean, I was very worried when another senator was, I don't know, looks like making up stories against our good friend Ronald Llamas about his. Like, you don't want to relitigate this case. Well, I don't want to go down that road because I think it's a rabbit hole. So, as you notice, I've been uncharacteristically very cautious on this issue because I want us not to forget that bigger picture.
Well, Richard, this Marcos administration has put a big emphasis on transparency initiatives, especially when it comes to maritime issues. But you also have the DFA saying that quiet diplomacy must be pursued. Is there a way for us to strike a balance between quiet diplomacy and transparency?
Okay, so dito I'm very sympathetic to all sides. I completely agree with Secretary Lazaro, who, by the way, was at the forefront of negotiating yung de-escalation. Remember, just the other year, naputulan ng daliri ng isang Philippine Navy sundalo natin, isang bayani natin. Things were getting out of control. And it was back then, as the Undersecretary for DFA, in charge of bilateral negotiations and dialogue with China, she was the one who oversaw some sort of mechanism for us to de-escalate. So Secretary Lazaro has a proven track record of effectively de-escalating it. At the same time, naintindihan ko rin yung other side of this equation, people in the Coast Guard, people in other agencies of the government who basically were not allowed to do their job during Duterte time. So parang nangyari dito is because under Duterte, President Duterte, for 6 years, a lot of very patriotic and passionate people, including, I would say, Commodore Tariela, were not able to fully, fulfill their duties because of the executive, interventions. And back then, even the Foreign Affairs Secretary, Cayetano, right, would sing to a different tune. Now that I think they feel there's a chance for them to express what is right and what they correctly believe is right. I think what we're seeing here is that both the pro-engagement camp and at the same time the let's make the red lines clear camp are out in the open. And I think this is where it's important for the president to sit down with all of these people. We need an interagency coordination on what kind of message we want to send. Because to some people, they're wondering if we are also doing good cop, bad cop to China and other countries. But my sense is it's not good cop, bad cop. It's just two very sincere camps having two very different conceptions of how we should deal with challenge. One says quiet diplomacy, that's DFA clearly, but the other side is saying, no, we have to push our position because we have to make our red lines clear to China because we feel it's not clear enough to them.
Circling back to the Kalayaan Island Group and the potential debate between Justice Carpio and Senator Marcoleta, Richard, I just wanted to get your thoughts because we had Justice Carpio here just a few days ago, and he was saying, we should have gone to the ICJ for a territorial dispute. This is, of course, about KIG. Kalayaan Island Group. Do you think this is a good time? Because we were wondering why nobody had actually done it yet or started it. Apart from the fact it's mahal.
For ICJ, you need both sides to agree. And in fact, the Philippines, you can go to the ICJ website. During the Estrada administration, we also made exemptions to ICJ jurisdiction on the question of anything that has to do with our sovereignty claims. In theory, yes, we have to be open to additional or successive legal cases against China, building on our initial case in 2016, whereby the arbitral tribunal in The Hague made it clear that there was a violation of our sovereign rights, there was ecological damage, etc. But I think that's more like a nuclear option. That should be like one of our tools in the toolkit. But at this point in time, to be honest, I know it sounds strange coming from me, I am for stabilization. This year, we're the ASEAN chair. This is a unique opportunity for us to get the rest of ASEAN to, at the very least, understand our point of view. Because to be honest, when I go across ASEAN, what I tend to hear is, "Oh, you Filipinos, you're the deputy sheriff of US in the region." That is the Chinese narrative. They try to portray us as fake Asians, as America's proxy in ASEAN. So this is our year to get them to our side, or at least get them to see our side.
Okay,
And this
so
this messy domestic politics is not helping, to be honest.
So, Richard, what should the National Security Council be convened, or should the president just call for a LEDAC to kind of tell the senators, "Hey guys, meron tayong summit ngayon." Should the executive
Absolutely.
take, a step into this word war?
Absolutely. I mean, the last time we had a very capable president, who, by the way, is behind the LEDAC, is President Ramos, right? It was during President Ramos we had the mischief crisis, a very serious crisis. I think we can take a page from President Ramos, who moved on multiple fronts. He reached out to ASEAN. In fact, the Code of Conduct negotiation discussion started way before. It was during Ramos' time. He bilaterally reached out to China, even had karaoke with the Chinese premier back then. And then at the same time, he also reached out to our allies in the US, and eventually had a visiting forces agreement. And also, there was a legislative executive coordination. I think this is where it's important that the president is the president. Doesn't just say, "Oh, we in the executive are this, bahala kayo dyan sa Senate." No, no. Ang pakanan ng ating bansa ay nakasalalay dito. ASEAN chair tayo this year. Ang ating mga senador ay national leaders. So what they say matters internationally. Pinapakinggan sila. I know their intentions is very good, especially those who are taking tough stands, Senator Kiko, among others. Pero sana wag natin kalimutan na meron tayong national interest dito, na hindi tayo papasok dun sa rabbit hole ng gusto ng ibang tao, which is to make us look as if we're the one bullying China, or make it as if we are the one, trying to provoke the situation. In fact, that's not the case. We are the victims in the West Philippine Sea, and let us make that clear to the rest of the region.
Well, despite the heated verbal exchanges and the escalating word war, Richard, some analysts believe that this won't have any effect when it comes to our bilateral economic relations with China. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, there's a kind of an autopilot mode to our bilateral relationship with China in terms of trade. And unfortunately, it's not actually a very symmetrical one. We keep on importing from China. I remember 20 years ago, we had trade surplus with China. Now we have huge trade imbalance with them. We keep on importing them. So the importers in the Philippines are just going to continue to do that. What we need to do with China is that, first of all, stabilize the situation in the West Philippine Sea and make our red lines clear. Make sure there's no reclamation in the Scarborough Shoal. There's no military facilities built on Sabina Shoal and Kalayaan Group of Islands or near that area. But at the same time, also explore ways whereby we can look at long-term cooperation. I mean, China is now the gold standard for industrial policy. For electric cars, BYD just took over Ford as the biggest car sales company in the world. They're already number one EV exporter in the world. China has so much to offer to the rest of the region. Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, they're all benefiting from more high quality Chinese investments. These are the things that we should discuss with China. But we are not going to be even in a position to discuss this if puro tayong Zarzuela, right? We have to bring down the tensions, have a mature discussion, make our red lines clear, and then from there talk to China.
To your point, Richard, about, we always talk about this. China always has very consistent messaging. They've stuck to it for decades. Meanwhile, us, it always changes because of it's the nature of our democracy, right? But you mentioned that, of course, Malacanang has said its position. The DFA, which is under the executive, has also said its position via a statement, which I'm sure you've read. Not only that, they assigned a new spokesperson for the Maritime Affairs Department, and we've heard him speak for the first time finally. What are your thoughts on these measures from the executive? Is it going to be enough to put like a quote-unquote good cop in?
Well, I think maybe both sides have to reconsider their spokesmen in this case, because where I will disagree is that, yes, China has a long-term strategy, statecraft, etc. But also you have this wolf warrior, dragon warrior diplomacy, whereby it looks like some junior folks there want to get their promotion, want to establish their street credentials right away and kind of get ahead of themselves, right? This is a new phenomenon we see in China. So I see that also as immaturity, to be honest. So wag natin patulan. If we see immaturity on their part, wag na natin patulan. We can, off the record, tell them, like, sorry, like, back off, right? There are ways to deal with this kind of, I would say, immature diplomacy. On the part of the Philippines, as correctly pointed out a while ago, there has to be a legislative executive mechanism to talk to the senators to nicely say, hey, wag natin ipaya yung bansa natin. Let's be mature about this. There's a bigger picture here. There's an ASEAN chairmanship here. And at the same time, let's be honest, it looks like within the government, there are different points of view. So there has to be a kind of a clearinghouse kung saan isa lang yung spokesman at yung isang spokesman na yan, siya talaga magsalita. Hindi yung 10 yung spokesman or may isang number one spokesman and then 4 deputy spokesman or parallel spokesman.
tama ka.
Medyo messy yung communications natin, to be honest.
Okay. Now that, let's go to the debate now quickly before we let you go, Richard. Since Senator Marcoleta has imposed some conditions that don't look to be acceptable to Justice Carpio, baka hindi matuloy. Salamat na lang at hindi, di ba?
Yeah, well, honestly, I mean, it's nice to juice this out once in a while. I mean, even, you know me, but at some point you just have to stop it. Obviously, Senator Marcoleta is not interested in the legal nuances of this issue. Clearly, he didn't even understand some of the relevant provisions of the on clause. Like EEZ has nothing to do with territorial claims. That's why there are countries who have claims over islands. I don't know. I mean, like Falkland Islands, how far it is from UK, right? It's it just tells you this guy is not an on-clause expert. So honestly, and if he wants to make it about the big picture, he's not also known as a geopolitical expert. At hindi ko rin siya papatulan on geopolitics, right? So I think, this is a free country, right? Everyone say their side. And so far, I'm confident in the Filipino people. More than 90% of Filipinos in all surveys show that they are on the right side of history and they understand where Justice Carpio and all of these good-hearted senators are coming from. But let's also give diplomacy and stabilization some chance. Yun lang ang aking hingi ngayon.
I can't believe I'm agreeing with you for the first time.
I can't believe that I'm the voice of reason and maturity too. But I think it's the Oxford gentleman in me coming out finally.
Personification of a cool head.
Well, we thank you for speaking to us again. Geopolitical analyst Richard Heydarian.